But I think most importantly, I want to thank you for being here, because as we are saying, we have to be together against depression. 10% is an underestimate, okay? At the very least, 10%, probably about 20% of Indians have some kind of mental disorder, common mental disorder like anxiety or depression, which means there are at least about 200 million people in this country who need help. We have 135,000 people who commit suicide every year. In the time that we've just started this conversation, 2 people have committed suicide in this country. Young people, many of them. And the fact is that 40% of people you see in your practice as general practitioners have a diagnosable psychiatric condition. Studies across the world have shown that people with psychiatric issues will have higher rates of medical utilization, and GP practices have 40% minimum of people with psychiatric issues. And these psychiatric issues will affect the conditions that you are treating, like hypertension, diabetes, COPD, CHF, cardiovascular disease, and so on. And depression is a real illness. It has biological changes in the brain, in the body. It has a mortality rate of 10%. It has a morbidity rate which is more than most other physical conditions. And above all, depression is not a mental condition. It is definitely a condition of mind and body. When I started, after my MBBS, I studied psychiatry, and then I also did internal medicine. And studying both the specialties of internal medicine and psychiatry has led to this, obvious belief that it's unfortunate that depression is pushed aside into psychiatry and physical illnesses for internists and general practitioners, when the real fact is that all of this are unified. So can we stop the clock? Don't deduct this from my time, please. Don't deduct these 2 minutes. Time is very precious. I'm going to keep talking while he does this. Okay, for show of hands, how many of you are GPs or internists and other specialists? Okay, great. Let me start by establishing the fact that depression is a very common condition. Okay, let me share with you the epidemiology of depression in this country. It's the 3rd leading cause of global disease burden and will be the leading cause of disease burden in the world by the year 2030. And as you know, it affects everything. The thing about depression is we think that it affects one person. That's not true, right? Depression affects everyone in the family. Depression affects multiple generations, because if a parent is depressed, their children are depressed. When they grow up, they will raise children who are depressed. And I tell my psychiatrist friends, because results are sometimes hard in this field, but I say when we make a change, when you help one person, you're not helping just one person, you're helping several generations, you're helping a whole community, an entire family. The fact is that none of us are exempt from this condition. At 20%, either you or someone close to you will suffer from depression, even in your personal lives. Now, the lifetime prevalence in India, there are all kinds of data. Actually, 15% is probably a fairly conservative number, but let's go with that. There was a recent study which the IPS, understandably thought was not a too high number, but it said there was a 36% prevalence of major depressive episode. In another study, they found that in urban areas, 40% of people in companies were suffering from clinical depression. So in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, and so on. And we have, Dr. Rao's giving me an updated figure. We have 6,500 psychiatrists, maybe about 8,000 psychologists, and obviously that's not enough. So clearly, we need to engage your services and your help if this country is going to avert this epidemic. And we're on the brink of a huge epidemic, and really all of us need to work together. Just to review what happens and to substantiate the fact that this is a biological condition, as you can see, there are multiple areas of the brain which are implicated in depression. And the chief areas that are implicated in depression are the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, the limbic system, the nucleus accumbens, and the insular cortex. And of course the hippocampus. And if you look at this, I'll correlate this with the activity. This shows the activity where there's increased activity, which in those brain areas where there's decreased activity. And if you can see, there's increased activity in certain areas of the brain, particularly the orbitofrontal, prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the thalamus, the caudate, and there's decreased activity in the DLPFC, the insular and anterior cingulate cortex. Basically, there's a change in the functioning of the brain. And as you know, the brain has multiple layers, so to speak, and the emotions largely come from the limbic system. The amygdala in particular processes fear and threat. And when we are in health, like you and I right now, your limbic system is in a state of quiescence. It's not sending out any signals of fear or threat. Now, as doctors, and I know that many of us in the MBBS, we don't get much exposure to psychiatry. And I think one of the problems when you graduate MBBS is you get the feeling that psychiatry is less scientific, is less real, is all, hocus pocus, right? Would you agree that we have that sort of impression after MBBS कि यार कुछ हो रहा है उस रूम में, like it's not real, जो हम कर रहे हैं science है वो कुछ और कर रहा है, but it's actually very scientific. And the point that happens right in the brain is right now, suppose someone came to attack you, or a tiger came to eat you up. How would you react? You would do something. You would immediately run or fight. Would you decide to do that? Would you look at the tiger and say, should I? No. It will happen instantly. In other words, your limbic system and my limbic system is always waiting to protect us. And if there is a threat, it will send signals of fear and it will bypass your cortical circuits so that immediately you get into action. Now, consider what happens if the amygdala is overactivated when it shouldn't be. What if your amygdala was hyperactive? What if it was sending signals of threat when there was no threat? So, my point is that we think that emotions should be under our control. Even as doctors, we believe that when someone is sad, we say, hey, come on, you can be positive, you can snap out of it. But my point is no, our emotions are a function of our neurology, and just as I cannot control my pancreas, I cannot control my subcortical structures. Right? I think we're in agreement of that. So what happens in depression is a change in circuitry so that you have subcortical emotional circuits that are hyperactivated. You have your rational circuits like your prefrontal cortex that are underactive, so the person is tired, apathetic, and then there are changes physiologically, of course. Changes in your entire endocrine system, which alter everything like energy, motivation, mood, memory, and so on. So my point is, it's so much a biological condition that if it's untreated, there's actually atrophy of the hippocampus, and so people can develop pseudo-dementia and eventually real dementia from depression. You can look at the significant hippocampal atrophy, which by the way is reversed with good treatment. There are studies showing that people with major depressive disorder may actually have thinning of their cerebral cortex, smaller medial orbitofrontal cortices than controls, and this is a fairly well substantiated, robust finding in depression. You can see in this 3-year prospective study, they looked at 38 patients compared with 30 healthy controls and looked at the decline in gray matter density, and look at that. There's significant decline in gray matter volume in the hippocampus, amygdala, anterior cingulate cortex, and dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. Again showing that depression is a real neurological, biological condition as much as a psychological one. Now, why is there depression? There's a lot of theories. Of course, one of the early biological theories is that there's a deficiency in monoamines, that is the neurotransmitters serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. And certainly, this appears to be a part of the mechanism. The observation that monoamines have something to do with mood started actually with internists who prescribed reserpine for high blood pressure. And when they prescribed reserpine for high blood pressure, they found that people were getting depressed. And they knew that reserpine depletes monoamines, and that's how the first connection was made between monoamines and depression. We know that antidepressants increase serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, and therefore it could be a mechanism. However, it's far more complex than that, because we know antidepressants take at least 4 weeks to work, even though monoamines increase almost immediately. So it's not the whole story. One of the best replicated findings in the neurobiology of depression is altered hypothalamic pituitary axis. The HPA axis is altered. By the way, one of the things that psychiatrists are still trying to do is find a biological test that we can use across the board. And I think once we find a biological test that you can use to diagnose and monitor depression, it will raise depression to the level that it should be, which is that it's a serious medical illness. But just keep in mind that we already have several biological markers. For example, this HPA axis, and you can see that 50% of depressed patients will exhibit non-suppression of cortisol secretion in the dexamethasone suppression test. So there's an alteration of the HPA axis with chronically increased cortisol levels. Now, very interestingly, in the last about 5 years or so, 5 to 10 years now, we're looking at something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And they find, the researchers have found that there are decreases in several areas in the brain, decreases in BDNF levels. BDNF is secreted by neurons, and it's important for the neuronal health and maintenance of the neurons to have BDNF. When BDNF levels falls, as they do in depression, then you have atrophy and you have cell death. When we treat with antidepressants, there's actually an increase of BDNF levels after a month or so, and it correlates well with recovery from depression. So a lot of interesting research going into BDNF levels. As you can see in the slide, successful antidepressant treatment is associated with BDNF increase. Now, very quickly, how am I doing on time? Yeah. Very quickly, I want to talk to you about some chronic medical conditions that are accompanied by depression, and how depression complicates the course of these illnesses. These are illnesses that all of you treat. First of all, let's be clear that depression, it has lots of non-specific symptoms that are going to overlap with almost every physical condition. Fatigue, tiredness, poor sleep, anhedonia, which means loss of pleasure, cognitive changes. You can see this in multiple things, from a viral illness to rheumatological conditions and so on. So it's extremely non-specific. So you have to have a high threshold, you have to have a high index of suspicion to make the diagnosis of depression, because otherwise you might miss it when you're treating physical conditions. Let's look at acute cardiovascular disease. Now, only 25% of people who have heart disease and depression are diagnosed, which means 75% of people who have depression and heart disease, the depression is not diagnosed at all. It's all the symptoms are attributed to cardiovascular disease. And the fact is that 60%, 50 to 75%, depending on the study, 50 to 75% of people with cardiovascular disease have depression. And even more significantly is that this depression can cause death in people with cardiovascular disease. In a very interesting study, they found that post-MI, if someone has depression, I might have a slide somewhere, post-MI, look at the study. This was from 2004. 2 years later, after the MI, if someone had depression which was undiagnosed, untreated, the risk of mortality was twice as high as someone who was not depressed. If you are depressed a week after a myocardial infarction, you're 4 times more likely to die in 6 months. The risk of depression is as high as the risk of smoking for a person who has had a cardiovascular event. And 65% of people have this. And we know this. This is very, very well documented data. And yet, most of us, I don't think we screen for depression in people with cardiovascular disease. So I just want to reiterate that this has a real bearing on the outcomes of the conditions that you treat. And this is not just for myocardial infarction, this is true for congestive heart failure, it's true for people with post-coronary artery bypass. As you can see, it's an independent risk factor for heart disease, even when they control for such things as inactivity, obesity, and smoking. Now, what about other conditions? For example, strokes. We know that a significant percentage of people who have had strokes, cerebrovascular accident, will have major depressive disorder. There's some studies which say that everybody who's had a stroke will have some form of depression. Not a single person who has had a cerebrovascular accident will not have some form of depression. Minor depression maybe at half, 50%, major depression as high as 50%. So again, people with stroke independently, not because of the illness, not because of their disability, but because of neurovascular changes, neurological changes, they actually have clinical depression, again often missed and not treated. COPD, not something you think about when you think about depression, right? You probably treat a lot of chronic bronchitis, asthma, emphysema. Do you think about depression, anxiety in that population? No. However, look at this data. 16% of those who went for pulmonary rehab had depressive symptoms. People who had depression had 3 times the relapse rate compared to people without depression. There are lots of studies saying that there's a bilateral relationship. When people have COPD due to hypoxemia, due to an increased sort of respiratory rate, they get more anxiety. Bronchodilators are well known to cause anxiety. Corticosteroids, of course, can cause depression and anxiety. So the treatment of the condition and the condition can cause depression and anxiety. The chronic disability causes depression and anxiety. And there are certain other biological factors as yet not completely understood, including other neurotransmitters that can cause anxiety and depression in people with COPD. Diabetes. Diabetes is probably a very common condition. Most of you obviously have many patients with diabetes. Did you know that 11% at least of your patients with diabetes is probably, that's an underestimate, but at least 11% have major depression and major depressive disorder. In some studies as high as 30%, and in other studies as high as 45%. The point is, people with diabetes have a much higher rate of depression than the general population. And again, it's a bidirectional relationship in the sense that depression can lead to diabetes, and diabetes can lead to depression. Again, to underline a point that Dr. K.K. Agarwal raised, there is almost no condition of the body that is not affected by the mind, right? Because the mind and the brain controls the endocrine system, the immune system, the everything. So when they've looked at glycemic control, they found that if someone has depression, you're going to have a higher hemoglobin A1C over 4 years. They have a poorer compliance. They don't. They're because of counter-regulatory hormones like norepinephrine and adrenaline. Their glycemic control is decreased, so they need higher amounts of insulin and so on. And of course, because of the depression, their self-care is not as good. Their overall exercise and motivation is low as well. And of course, healthcare costs are higher. So in summary, I don't want to exceed my time. I want to keep some time for questions. We'll have questions after this brief presentation. Dr. Prasad Rao is going to talk about the diagnosis and treatment. But in summary, what I want to emphasize is a few things. One, depression is extremely common. You're going to see it in your personal life and in your professional life. As professionals, as doctors, we desperately need your help and your support, we meaning this country, because without the engagement of every single medical professional, we cannot avert this epidemic, and we will all suffer. We will suffer socially because there will be increased violence on the streets, road rage, drug addiction, social drift, unemployment, a bad economy. I'm not joking, because 30 million years were lost last year due to depression in this country. 30 million years, human years were lost. So it's going to affect all of us. It's going to affect our practice, of course, in terms of how your patients do. And if we all work together, though, I think we can reduce this the epidemic, probably even prevent many cases of depression when we catch them first line in a general practitioner's office. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be here for questions after this presentation. And please welcome Dr. Prasad Rao, who's going to talk about diagnosis and treatment. Thank you.